My name is Iftikhar Dadi, and along with John Tain, we have, we are kind of convened the Climate Congress, which includes the events of this evening. Welcome to all of you. And I just wanted to do a very brief introduction to our keynote speaker today, which is Anna Gade, who is a scholar of Islam, religion, and ethics, and looks at also Southeast Asia and environmental studies, but really her scope is much broader. She's the Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor in the Gaylord Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My bachelor's degree is also from Madison, where she teaches courses in environmental humanities, Islamic studies, and the academic study of religion and ethics. Her influential book, Muslim Environmentalisms, has defined Islamic environmental studies across multiple fields, including the environmental humanities. So, and one of the sites that Anna has worked on is Indonesia. And given the focus of the Lahore Biennale 03 with its focus on Asia, we thought that it would be very instructive for audiences in Lahore and Pakistan to also understand kind of an environmental ethics, from an Islamic kind of perspective, but from also kind of developments that are taking place in Indonesia. So Anna, thank you for accepting our invitation, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I'm so happy to get to come to Lahore, to Pakistan finally. It really is a dream come true. I'm so grateful to the organizers and everyone who has made this incredible international success here, dedicated to bringing attention to the world's most pressing issues in environmental justice and sustainability while highlighting perspectives of the global South. So tonight, I'm not talking about anything. I don't have art to show, unfortunately. I'm not an artist. I'm not even an art historian. I don't have an object lesson, except maybe if you think the environment is a hyperobject or the imaginary of Islam, you can decide about that. That said, there's going to be images throughout the talk from Indonesia that are meant to be evocative and to be in conversation with art from the Biennale and other conversations that we're continuing here in the climate conference, as well as more widely in public venues like this. Today, schools were closed. Here in Lahore is the air quality index in 2.5 millimeter particulate pollution broke records. Starting over the weekend, even as right outside, we have posters that are about breathing. So today, my talk is really about, among other things, how we're going to talk about this right here and right now. Can you hear me okay? Good. So one thing I want to say just briefly at the outset is a language of crisis is where the conversation often goes, for example, with issues like the pollution today, which we're all choking from. And I observe that many in the fields that I'm in conversation with, including Black, Indigenous, and subaltern studies, like Kyle White from the upper Midwest of the US, where I now teach, or Catherine Yusuf's Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, a very influential book. They all point out that crisis misses the point for the global South and many others, that crisis happened a long time ago for colonized communities, even as it unfolds every day. So another apparatus for apprehension and expression of climate realities, alongside old settler colonial nature concepts or talking about environmental problems like sustainability does, is the Anthropocene. And I also think that's a similarly inadequate model as an ethical framework for justice. This might be where religion and art come in. In any case, this is where I came into the conversation. I think I was offered this incredible opportunity to speak here, mashallah, in order to ground the ongoing discussion of the Climate Congress and appreciate the Biennale in and as the local, which is a little ironic, right? Because I come from far away in Indonesia most recently, but then also from the United States. In this case, though, this means the Muslim majority social and cultural setting of Lahore, and it means a consideration of Islam, a system that itself makes universal claims and ethical claims, many of them environmental. I'm humbled by this task and approach it with sincere humility. Now, my intention tonight is not to essentialize Islam, certainly not to orientalize Islam, but to bring Muslim perspectives into the conversation in a way that can be shared by all. So there's going to be some intro Islam in here tonight, in case that's something new for you. I also feel like I'm here to represent the interdisciplinary academic study of the environment, which is a little different from the environmental humanities, just to get geeky about it, or environmental inhumanities if you prefer. And my main goal here in that regard is to frame a conversation for the Biennale in terms of 3 of the cutting edge questions in the field, this being environmental studies, relating to interspecies relations, rights of nature, and environmental justice. And if you want, there's an open access article published in the Muslim World last year that is a longer version of some of this. Now, I don't have a normative ethics to share, and I'm no theologian, as you'll see, but I do want to offer a proposition to all of you as a takeaway from your time here tonight, which is that the environment, insert climate sustainability, is an ethical idea. It's a political idea. It's a scientific idea too. It's aesthetic. And often there is a pervasive tendency to cast environmental problems as being moral at their basis. Listen for it. We're doing ethics, whether we like it or not, I think, when we use an English word like sustainability or the environment. This week, the Climate Congress will end with a discussion of theory as practice in ethics, and I'm hoping this will have benefit in anticipation of that conversation, inshallah, presenting these 3 ideas as themes of the work that we're seeing in context: interspecies relations, rights of nature, and environmental justice. So the book was just mentioned. I just want to say some quick background about the book, and really foreground too. The image here is by a calligrapher from South Asia, from Kerala. He works in the restaurant industry in Dubai, and it's his rendition of a couple of verses of the Qur'an, which are about the bees. And when I set out to write this book kind of as an update to Islam and the environment, I realized that finding the environment in Islam was not difficult. In fact, we met the bees, delegates of the climate conference, just a couple of days ago in the park. And there'll be a reading for the workshop later this week that has a discussion of bees in the Qur'an as well. Translating, however, these kinds of frameworks, environment in Islam and Qur'an and other sources and in ethnographic material, back into environmental studies, however, meant that I had to give critique some steam and decolonize in ways that I really didn't anticipate in the field of environmental humanities. So just to get more specific for a minute, there's an extractive history of seeking resources in tradition, especially or including religious traditions, to express environmental norms. This is a secular project. NGOs do this, along with being a religious project. It tends to be fairly essentializing, which isn't surprising. And there's other ways to see how Muslim perspectives provide a more critical intervention into global environmental discourses and circulations. And I think this process is helpful to consider now in order to appreciate, at least descriptively, even if you're not looking for, normative truths, to appreciate descriptively the diversity of Islams, and also to recenter questions in environmental ethics, like anthropocentrism is the main problem, the Anthropocene is the main solution, the nature of what is a crisis, and so on. Okay, one last thing I want to say, I said it already, but I want to emphasize it, is I really appreciate how this Climate Congress seeks to do this from the perspective of the Global South. As you can see, the slide's gone now, but I'm teaching at an international Islamic university right now in Jakarta, Indonesia, which has a graduate program now in climate change of students from all over, from Asia, from Africa, and I find that every day we're working, sifting through the complexity in a no analog present while being attentive to post-colonial realities. So I'm excited to, now to get to do this in a trans-Asia context and to be included in the conversation. I just have a few upstream points to make before we talk a little bit about ethics. Settler colonial models, I don't think you can really get away from them when speaking English. They represent an unavoidable authoritative language of global environmental ethics. They're a lot about respect and values. They're kind of Kantian. If you're interested in hearing more about that, I can tell you. And they're hegemonic. Other systems like Islam has to interact with these frameworks in an Anglophone setting or risk illegibility, incorporation, or erasure. So my next book is about environmental ethics and not Islam because I actually would like more people in North America to read it. Additionally, shared terms for the environment do circulate globally and dynamically, connecting local and global registers using this language. Think about NGOs. This doesn't mean that Muslim ethical responses that are cognate to post-Christian terms, like, moral philosophy from Europe or something like that, are any less authentic. They provide mutual meaning and enrichment and also critique. Okay, so outside of moral philosophy, there are pervasive functional terms for ethics and environmental studies, and we're using them all the time in our climate congress and in regular conversations that we have. For example, stewardship, largely taken for granted, or even sustainability, for example, finds intellectual grounding in development literature like Brundtland's influential report in 1987 for the UN, Our Common Future, and is often articulated in the bureaucratic listing of Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. It functions as an ethics, but when examined closely, such ethics yield fairly loose and problematic notions like future generations. The ideas aren't well theorized. Maybe they don't need to be. Maybe a to-do list is okay. But the lack of coherence can be an issue, compounded in areas like the fragmentation of effects of climate over space and time, especially when considering issues of justice. Relevant principles, however, are articulated in detail in Islamic sources that I'll call ethical. This is outside of the akhlaq tradition mostly. And as in the main points to follow, these sources now address areas that are on the leading edge of environmental advocacy. Okay, so a little more upstream stuff. I don't think this audience really needs to know that Muslim majority systems developed many areas of knowledge that became current fields of environmental studies and sciences like chemistry, biology, earth sciences, and so forth. You know that, right? Also, you definitely know that most of the Muslim world was at some point dominated by European powers, and thus sciences developed with the imprint of colonial prestige. And also, as a third point, Muslim environmentalisms and contemporary environmental practice synthesize the circulation of Muslim ideas along with globally shared values like the SDGs and conservation models. Muslim environmental ethics encompasses more than the correspondence with present environmental discourse, however, the bees are gone, but like the bees. And this reaches back long before a legacy of contact with Europe and also predates the more recent intervention of the global idea of the environment or ecology in the past century. And even Arabic has a relatively new word for this, al-bi'a. Many today do in fact seek to derive present Islamic ethics from the text of the 7th century Qur'an. Due to all of these factors, Muslim perspectives on key issues at the cutting edge of global environmental ethics may recenter environmental ethics on issues of advocacy today, and that's what we're doing. I really don't want to talk about the Anthropocene that much. I'll bring in material related to scales of time at the end of this talk when discussing justice, but I do want to mention it because I think this is an example and fairly easy example to relate about how Muslim perspectives may recenter discourse in environmental humanities, including various forms of art and expression. And it can also put into context what I have to say later about environmental justice, or EJ, in a few moments. So the Anthropocene is could be considered as that era of Earth's history, that epoch, that right now in which human activity or anthropogenic change influences planetary conditions in an indelible way, and in a way that affects the Earth record in a way that will still be there even after humans are gone. And, I have a critique of the Anthropocene. Who doesn't have a critique of the Anthropocene? Chakrabarty's Climate of History article way back when had a critique of the Anthropocene. My critique here isn't so much about global inequity and variability. It's more that the Anthropocene is not an ethical idea, which is fine, except that many want it to be. It's excellent for expressing modern anxieties and the old question around anthropocentrism. Humans don't matter at all, yet humans matter, the most. And so there's that existential kind of a crisis. And for many in the humanities, the Anthropocene is a way to indicate a call to notice, or to have a scalar awareness as an extensionist and existentialist move. But in my view, it also kind of leaves you right on the abyss of deep time. This image right here is from Indonesia. This is from North Sulawesi. This is actually at the abyss of a volcano, a geologic formation. And right when I took this photo, I was thinking about being a geologic agent in an Anthropocene kind of way. There was another guide who was from the Netherlands, who had been trained by, the guy who took me up the volcano. And he and his clients were throwing rocks into the volcano. And my guide said, you should stop that. And he said in Indonesian, kenapa tidak? Why not? Why shouldn't I do this? And the answer was, well, you can trigger a kind of a gas release or other kind of activity within the crater that could affect climbers and others. But, I think about this in terms of how to understand how we're in deep time all the time in a consequential kind of a way. So in that case, there was definitely a moral to the story. And I think that consequential deep time provides horizons of cause and effect morally and materially in a way that the Anthropocene concept alone doesn't give you, right? It's a dating system, essentially. Constant contemplation of the akhirah, the time to come, not to mention the past destruction of previous communities, messages that comprise about a fifth of the text of the Qur'an address this. There's little written in environmental ethics, however, about this message that's expressed emphatically by so many of the Qur'an's 6,000 or so verses, and more in hadith that are about apocalypticism and justice. And this is surprising to me, given the centrality of al-akhirat in the Qur'an and also in tradition and in Islamic religious writings that have been so influential all over the world, including right here. Okay, so whether or not one is religious, you don't have to be, we can all observe that Islam's emphatic presentation of radical global transformation in the Qur'an can address existential anxiety for some in the face of present slow violence and impending catastrophic environmental events. Muslim worldviews have had a notion of crisis embedded in their eschatological reality from the start, and it's an ongoing ethical calculus and not an ultimate collapse into oblivion. This horizon doubles back on the present, and I have a lot of empirical research actually on how this motivates actual people in in Southeast Asia to activism and engagement. The Qur'an directs related affective sentiments, feelings, quite specifically with respect to meaningful signs on the horizons. And a fifth of the scripture describes the end of the world with a robust corpus of authoritative hadith, additionally treating such themes. So it's an ethics of consequence, although not moral consequentialism per se. Islam's environmental soteriology highlights the significance of choices made in the present. The ends of life are an ultimate test, as stated clearly by the Qur'an, and the related determination of justice is immediately relevant to ethical and environmental action in this world. So the Anthropocene's frameworks support new materialisms that would ascribe ontological vibrancy that enhance dry geology, and crisis existentialism provides no such helpful tools to apprehend the ends of the world. In a Quranic understanding, all the Earth's sentient and non-sentient beings are bound to a moral universe as a creation, makhluk, a creation of God's in multiple scales of deep time and space, implicating everyday human actions in this field. So it's an alternative view of the Anthropocene is what I'm saying. Next slide, please. I'm going to devote the remainder of my time to a consideration of how Muslim religious thought and practice shapes emerging conversations in environmental ethics, rather than just reflecting its past in European and Enlightenment settler colonial moral philosophy. So I'm going to narrow the discussion now into these three areas of multi-species relations, rights of nature, and environmental justice, or EJ. Islam recasts Anglophone discourse, kind of like I just tried to do with the Anthropocene. On these topics, it decolonizes, it provides critique by denaturalizing historical roots, and recenters key questions with new answers. In terms of multi-species perspectives, rights of nature, and environmental justice, Muslim systems offer the following. They're communal in focus, they blend law and ethics around rights-based notions, and they also scale horizons past the planetary and into the areas of justice, like I was just talking about. One doesn't need to be Muslim or affirm unverifiable faith claims to appreciate this and to be meaningful in conversation with it here this week, because these are the ethical questions that come up when we talk about climate. So this little frog is going extinct in West Java right now. And multi-species ethics has been a primary concern of environmental humanities over the past decade, bringing together animal studies, indigenous perspectives, and other ontological concerns. In Anglophone writing, this can act as a foundation for rights of nature and other key issues. Now, Anglophone ethics, just to bring you up to date, if this isn't your field, has struggled with these communal perspectives. It's due to features of Enlightenment traditions like Kantian ethics, because they view the individual as the locus of ethical determination, and then means that ethics is a human-to-human concern. Multi-species perspectives are also at the core of the European extensionist story about the surprise of unsettling anthropocentrism through ecology, which more recently has come to embrace abiotic along with biotic systems with notions like the more than human or the post-human. In contrast, Muslim systems have long been communal in focus with respect to environmental presentations in law, theology, and other religious fields. And I'll give you a little sampler of that right now. These encompass the human, the non-human, and even non-sentient creatures. So, Muslim scriptures model interspecies relations. Prophetic hadith are full of examples of this. In a Quranic example from the 27th chapter of the Qur'an, the Prophet Sulaiman listens to a tiny ant who speaks up, begging for mercy not to be crushed underfoot. And the Prophet smiles in reaction, and he himself prays for God's mercy. The Qur'an speaks this language of mercy and community throughout, implying both non-human, like jinn, as well as human community. For instance, next slide please, an environmental verse of the Qur'an that's fundamental for clarifying the equivalence of humanity to other creatures in this regard is the following, which indicates that non-human beings also have a community or ummah just like people do. And it mentions the beings that fly on wings, and I'm constantly reminded here in Lahore about the birds. I can't keep from looking up all the time. To place humanity at the center of the problem, we should extend and think about more than the human. This is already happening in Quranic systems, as you can see. This comes with a powerful Quranic ontology that posits the creator, al-Khaliq, a name for Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in relation to all creation, makhluk, rather than the man and nature kind of dichotomy. It's pretty uncontroversial to say that the Qur'an holds that humans are always a part of creation, to find an absolute contrast to the creator in what's called the primordial covenant in English, and are ultimately judged according to this criteria. Stewardship, khilafa, or Khalifa, as God's designation to humans, in a sense, could be cognate to Christian interpretation of the Hebrew Bible's book of Genesis, may be read into verses of the Qur'an and on one or two instances with voiced ambivalence. But this is hardly emphasized as much as are the numerous general expressions for human beings as being one of many inhabitants of the earth, al-ard, for example, as we are instructed to walk upon it softly. And I've got a little bit more to say about this theology here, but I think I'm going to skip over it. It's in the article. We can talk about it some more if that's your thing. Just one important point about this that a lot of contemporary eco-theologians are making, like the American scholar Sara Tlili, is that within this model, nature or creation provides the model for humanity in terms of being in correct relationship of worship to the Creator. And in this verse right here, again, there's a mention of the birds. The Qur'an's many descriptions of natural phenomena continually point to signs on which humans are transformatively to ponder, reflect, feel, and change. The difference for humans, as Tlili shows, is that humans and jinn have some capacity for self-determination to respond, but nature is Muslim according to its essence or its fitrah. Okay, so bringing it back now to environmental ethics for all. These are relational ethics, an example, one of many. And Muslim public reasoning on environmental law and ethics claims that such a relational perspective is ontologically fundamental. I'll say more what that means in a minute. If the environment is premised to be creation and the relation that it engenders, as in Muslim scriptural accounts, then it follows that the environment posits the very existential conditions of Islam. And legal scholars use this reasoning in order to come up with rationales for judgments and determinations about the environment. This relationality is both horizontal, hablum min an-nas, and vertical, hablum min Allah. In orientation, as in Muslim expressions commonly heard in connection to the environment, which draw on the verse of the rope of God, this communal ontology includes non-sentient entities like natural resources, which are also creatures, providing a basis for further compounded environmental understanding. So we can talk more in Q&A or later this week about the holistic ecological model about relationality coming out of Anglophone systems, scientifically and not. But I'm going to move on here to talk about rights of nature. And here are our mangroves, right? Rights of nature or community-based rights are increasingly popular global mechanisms for environmental activism. That's why I bring it up today. This may seem to be premised upon multi-species environmental personhood, although it's not exactly the same concept, even when viewed most practically as extending legal standing to environmental objects. This approach has been leveraged by indigenous communities like in North America, where I'm from, like the Ho-Chunk and White Earth and Anishinaabe nations, where I live right now in the upper Midwest of the US. And it's also been ascribed to other indigenous contexts in constitutional systems like Ecuador and Bolivia. More recently, the notion has been construed as the empowerment of communities to act on behalf of the natural objects on which they rely. So some people don't call this rights of nature anymore, they call it community-based rights. Anglophone networks express such environmental personhood for applied ethics in terms of neoliberal frameworks, notions like rights and property and even monetized value, which also suits constitutional and modern court systems. The rights-based approach, as you probably know, has been common for some time in international development frameworks as well, like in appeals to human rights. I could talk for a long time about this, but I just want to say something briefly to give you a sense of how Muslim systems accommodate these concerns and readily blend law and ethics around rights-based notions, something that tends not to happen so much in traditions in the European heritage. This affords a clear articulation that can be applied to environmental situations if not enforced. Islamic law has a terminology for rights, or haqq, that predates European law in this area by centuries, and such a juridical framework is further open to moral and ethical theorization. So it's not just the case that Islamic traditions have long-standing and well-developed law for the management of resources like forests and water, which it does, and principles for animal protection and so forth. Muslim systems also generate a reasoned rationale for such norms and practices, especially in the modern era. So to give you an example of what this is, an emphasis on the public good, maslaha or istislah, in legal reasoning extends far back historically and represents a foundational notion of community rights. It's also used for other kinds of reasonings as well. In such legal and ethical modes, Islamic systems may support and also provide critique of neoliberal aspects, framing environmental causes of rights and nature and also their commoditization. So in Indonesia, one of the ways this is happening is by thinking about adat, or traditional law, which also can be an Islamic category. There's a lot of fatwas protecting nature with the kinds of rationales that I just mentioned, for example, about maslaha. And it's actually front page news right now with issues about mining concessions potentially going to religious organizations. People are really thinking about these ethics seriously in the public sphere. I have a little bit of fiqh, or Islamic law geekiness, here to share with you. I don't think I'm going to go too deeply into it, but for those who are interested in this sort of thing, a fundamental tenet for resource use, articulating something like environmental rights, is commonly said to have been set forward by a hadith of the Prophet, that people are partners in water, vegetation, and fire. This is on the authority of Abu Dawood. And a lot of scholars have interpreted this as a general obligation to sustain life, and others have applied it as a reasoning for, specifically for resources like water, like the right to thirst, providing someone who is thirsty with something to drink, with haqq shifa, for example. Okay, and there's more to say about animal rights and law, including reasoning that supports norms in terms of the well-being and even the feelings of animals. And there's a lot of jurisprudential material, particularly from the Shafi'i tradition, about that. In the modern era, such principles of legal reasoning are extended by analogy for environmental ethics. So, fatwas, for example, which are non-binding answers to specific questions that are imbued with the authority of the respondent, are a productive mechanism for environmental rulings. And with this, the idea of maslaha, or the public good, appears frequently as a rationale. Another widespread rationale for Islamic thinking through this framework of rights is maqasid al-sharia, the aims of the law. This premise is especially prevalent in the era of nation states and holds that most fundamentally the law upholds 5 aims, or maqasid, as its criteria. These are life, religion, reason, property, and heritage. And this point typically comes up right away in presentations of Islamic environmental law. Muslim perspectives on Islamic law blend law and ethics around rights-based notions for humans and non-humans, highlighting community considerations that include the more than human. In none of these approaches are presented as other creatures or nature itself being valued in a monetized sense, which is how rights of nature is often articulated in juridical systems in Anglophone law. Okay, so this is meant to indicate the shipping industry, an industry with some of the most emissions worldwide, and also global flows of capital. And additionally, Southeast Asian maritime world and networks is a counterpart to the Silk Road as a system, like we were discussing the other night. Okay, so here's the final point on environmental justice. Along with rights of nature, EJ, environmental justice, is a critical and emerging area for environmental advocacy and applied ethics. Up to now, the topic hasn't really been included in standard Anglophone treatments of environmental ethics. The theory for the field adheres in praxis is illustrated by a book by an American, Robert Bullard. It's called Dumping in Dixie, a work which drew on the equivalency of environmental racism in the US and environmental justice. How to extend that model from the United States in questions of racial justice to global issues like the North and South is a tricky question, more tricky than it may seem. A Marxian emancipatory commitment aligning with EJ is further articulated in the field of political ecology. Legal questions that are stated clearly around EJ relate scales, processes, and contexts like that global to the local, as well as the planetary, while typologizing models of justice in various forms like distributive justice, processual justice, and so on and so forth. However, the ethical basis of EJ mirrors the overall split of law and ethics in Anglophone traditions, which I've already said is not so much of a thing in Islamic cases. To the extent that EJ focuses on scaling worldwide issues like climate and sustainability that affect regions and groups disproportionately, or intergenerational, multi-species justice, such as with matters of extinction, EJ can also enroll a crisis concept. At the same time, the notion of crisis can be subject, like I said, to serious critique on the part of the various groups engaged at the forefront of EJ advocacy. Muslim perspectives, starting with the Qur'an and required ritual actions like zakat, legal almsgiving, highlight issues of equity and justice prominently. To act with commitment on behalf of the oppressed and marginalized within both proximate and ultimate registers, like the Day of Judgment, appears throughout the text as an emphatic message of social justice in the Qur'an. There are multiple expressions for the name for oppression in the Qur'an, like dhulm. Oppressors, of course, oppress themselves. All of these are relevant to the conditions of environmental equity, like environmental racism when considering disproportional impacts on communities. Significantly, this isn't a call to individualized or private morality, but a collective one that's incumbent on entire communities, as articulated constantly by the voices of prophets in the Qur'an. The Qur'an is full of consequential terms like adl and qist, and exhorts to righteousness by stating more than once the imperative to stand up for justice in the way of Allah for the sake of this world and the world to come. You know, the question of what happened to social justice in Islamic theory in the 20th century is something that could probably just be discussed in another lecture. So here's a slide of Jakarta, where I'm living right now. I know the pollution is in Lahore today, but this is an EJ issue throughout the global south and in fact throughout the world. So I want to conclude now with some of these ideas about consequential horizons and some more generalizations. Islamic perspectives on environmental ethics of the past and the present scale horizons past the planetary and the human in the area of justice. And this is relevant, I think, to non-religious and even non-Muslim environmental ethics, insofar as it seeks existential comfort, like climate grief, meaning and direction under unprecedented circumstances. The Qur'an is replete with depictions of the scales of justice and pairs this with vivid accounts of the transformation of the world's ecology with gripping environmental description. The weak and marginalized in this world and ultimate judgment in the next are rendered dialogically and palpably in the text, with biotic and ecological matter enlivened to testify across landscapes and generations. God's mercy is known, environmental relations are revealed when everything's called to account, and even the inanimate, even the earth, al-ard, speaks, revealing the burdens that she has held. The Qur'an portrays this against the backdrop of environmental destruction, depicted numerous times as matters of ultimate judgment and justice that are underscored rhetorically always to be meaningful in the present. So even though Judgment Day is in the future, environmental justice isn't deferred up to the limit point. The Quranic idea of accounting or hisab continually scales the deep time of ultimate human consequences into the frame of immediate actions. Rather than only measuring responsibility against horizons of the unthinkable, the Quranic processes of creation, destruction, and recreation on which the Qur'an instructs humanity constantly to reflect, even with their limited capacity to understand, orients humans' ethical action temporally in the present vis-a-vis other creatures. And ethically and morally, the Quranic rhetoric expresses the idea that the world is a test in the right now. There's many verses, this is one of them, that show that humans are tested, calling on Muslims also to compete in good works. As the prophets deliver their messages, the Qur'an's numerous accounts show that communities are tested in this regard and are told not to cover up the truth of what is evident before them in the signs on the horizons and in themselves. So this verse has the word, a plural for khalifa in it, and also the sense of testing as being sort of the ultimate ends of environmental experience. And here's Bali. Oh, actually, it's not the last slide. It's Bali's airport. We're on the way there. The signs that Qur'an presents as coming at the end times speak in context, not primarily as a prognostication then at the end of the world, but are emphasized as a predictive reminder to those in the present about inevitable consequences to be faced in the future as a result of actions taken in the moment. Communal and individual responsibility for the state of the surrounding world is clear in the Qur'an's portrayal of destructive signs, events taking on new meaning in an era of radical anthropogenic environmental change. It even instructs readers continually to examine the present phenomenal world and past traces of anthropogenic change in the human landscape to derive powerful lessons about ultimate judgment before it's too late. Okay, now here's the last slide. This poor little musalla, it's not really a mosque, it's a prayer area, is left outside of what's called the Great Garuda Wall. It's actually not that long a wall, protecting a neighborhood on the north side of Jakarta that otherwise would be flooded due to the general subsidence of the city. The city's sinking for a few reasons, mostly because of groundwater extraction, but other factors too, like just the sheer weight of all the construction that's there. And this image, you know, anybody can get this image. You just go to Sundakalapa to the end of the road and you stick your camera over the wall and you snap the same photo. But I like this photo because it's from the New York Times. And in a sense, this photo has become like an image in itself indicating climate change and vulnerability in the global south in ways that I think are a little bit problematic, as well as expressing some important truths. Okay. In conclusion, Islamic material confirms cutting-edge interests of environmental ethics that may not be so surprising, given that Muslims historically were instrumental in developing the very same sciences that have become the staples of environmental studies. Such issues are addressed with depth and detail by Muslim sources, including law, theology, and philosophy. We've had a little dip into some of those this evening. And now provide new insight and post-colonial critique from the perspective of comparative ethics, a project we can all be a part of. In regard to key current discussions in environmental humanities and ethics regarding multi-species relations, rights of nature, and environmental justice, Islam advances present conversations in what I think are much needed directions. Muslim systems for human and more than human environmental ethics are communal in focus. They blend law and ethics around rights-based notions, and they also scale horizons even past the planetary and the human in areas of justice that are consequential. So, to review, with respect to multi-species relations, Islamic material offers an ontology that's non-anthropocentric. At the same time, it guides humanity to a mutually sustaining relationship with other creatures and beings. In areas of law and ethics, there's clear Islamic rulings that pertain to rights of nature and community-based rights. And finally, Muslim systems offer the registers required in any system to apprehend environmental justice in an intergenerational sense, articulating a meaningful understanding of testing against this horizon as would be commensurate with a crisis issue like anthropogenic climate change. One final thought. For such concerns, the theory of the Anthropocene, I think, needs to move beyond geological positivism to apprehend the moral proportions of its own metaphor. In order to keep apace with the implications of radical justice, such as are at the root of Muslim environmentalism and a soteriological sense of meaning, it must accept both empirical realism as well as imaginative vividry of a symbolic framework of human communities and conditions, like are expressed in the Qur'an, as we've been looking at tonight. This, I think, is the power of religious ethics and Islamic environmental ethics in particular, which are scaled naturally to the existential proportions of environmental realities. Thank you very much.